Stay tuned to the end of this video to a word for our patrons. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Talk FGO Wanted, the show where we let you know if you want to roll that 5-star. And the King of the Franks is here, after so long! Seriously, it's been so long since Extella Link, oh my god. So today we're going to talk about a new limited SSR, Saber Charlemagne. We're going to cover history, fate lore, mechanics, and more, if you've never watched a Wanted before. Also, hey, we have a pretty big playlist, we've been doing this for a while. This is Wanted 110, so got a lot in the back dash for you to check out. Anyway, this one's going to be long, so buckle up, Buttercup. And so, beginning in real-life history, Charlemagne, living approximately 742 to 814 CE, who was just Carolus when he was born, would be probably something like Karl in modern German or Charles in English or French, was probably born in 742, like I said. There is some wiggle room there because historical dates are not always accurate. Anyway, he was born to Pepin the Short, who would become king of the Franks before Charlemagne, and his mother, Bertrada of Laon. He was born in Francia, the kingdom of the Franks, but the exact region where he was physically born, at least, based on our records we have, would probably be where modern Belgium is now. There's a lot of trans-European stuff going on here. Very much Great Europa. The name Charlemagne comes from the French. It's literally Charles le Maigre, or Charles the Great. The German way to render his name is usually Karl der Grosse, and in Latin it would be Carolus Magnus. He was named after his grandfather, Charles Martel, aka Charles the Hammer, who is an entirely separate discussion. Feel free to look up in your own time. Like with a lot of future famous people, we don't really know a lot about his young age or even his pre-inheritance period. We do know that it was pretty well educated. It's believed he could read and write, which in the 8th century was unusual even for a future king. He spoke both the French and Germanic dialects of his native tongue. Again, this would be kind of like as we're getting a language split. So yeah, he had both versions of the Frankish tongue down. Also spoke Latin and probably a little Greek, though that may have been something he picked up later along with reading. We're not actually 100% sure on that. We do know that he was big into intellectual reform later, so he may have taken up languages at a future date. But historians said he could speak Latin and a little bit of Greek. Charlie's father, Pepin, was legitimized as king of the Franks probably around 754, but he died of an illness in a campaign against the region of Aquitaine in 768. So in accordance with customs at the time, Charles and his brother Charlemagne were both made kings of Francia. Yes, if you've ever played a game of Crusader Kings set with this type of inheritance rule, for some reason we splitify the kingdom, which does mean equal shares, but also means that territory gets divided. Anyway, they didn't really get along. There's a lot of back and forth there with their various wars, but luckily for Charlie, Charlemagne suddenly died in 771, leaving him the sole king of the Franks. I say that like there's some kind of conspiracy. It was just very convenient for him. He died of an illness. There's no real, evidence or rumor that it was some kind of shenanigans. It's just, one of those twists of fate. Now, as king, Charlemagne spent a lot of time fighting the Saxons and the Lombards. That's northern Italy there. And he got appreciation from Pope Adrian I because the Lombards had some of his stuff. So he engaged in the campaign against those guys, and in 774, the Lombards surrendered. And Charlemagne declared himself also king of the Lombards, which was a relatively unprecedented annexation. This was not actually a thing that was done much at the same time. You would, beat up the other guys, depose their king, and go, I am king now. So this is how he became king of the Franks and the Lombards. And during this time period, Charlemagne did a little bit of campaigning, continued to beat up the Saxons in the east, do a little work on Spain in the south, adding Bavaria, Saxony, and as far south as Barcelona to his growing empire. Also, just as a footnote, I don't know how important it was at the time, but it's something that comes up a lot later in fiction. It was during the Spanish campaign in 778 where the real-life Battle of Roncesvalles Pass? Sorry, let me English that up a little. Let me American that up a little. The Battle of Roncesvalles Pass. Yeah, Roncesvalles Pass. Which would become later mythologized in the Song of Roland. That's when that actually happened. More on that later. But wait, we're not done yet. See, Charlie was buddies with the new Pope, Leo III. And in 799, some of Leo's political enemies tried to have him killed. At least according to the descriptions I read. Like, literally attacked him in the street and tried to, like, poke out his eyes or something. It was nasty. Anyway, so he fled, naturally, to the court of Charlemagne. Charlemagne sent him back with some guards and some magistrates, and then eventually personally made his way to Rome and saw that Leo was cleared of all charges. Basically, he sent some guys to investigate. The guys were like, man, I don't think any of these charges against the Pope are good. And Charlemagne was like, well, no man can judge the Pope, so, Mr. Popey, do you solemnly swear you didn't do any of it? And the Pope was like, yeah. But this means that at Christmas Mass in the year 800, at St. Peter's Basilica, Leo did Charlie the Ultimate Solid and declared him Carlo Augustus, Imperator Romanorum, Charles the August, Emperor of the Romans. Pop the crown on his head. Now, sadly, this version of the Carolingian Empire, as we like to call it, was short-lived. Charlemagne died on January 28th, 814. And by 840, his empire was divided up amongst his grandsons, which is why France and Germany can separately claim lineage from him. However, his long, relatively stable reign enabled the Carolingian Renaissance, a period of increases in literacy and intellectualism, a surge in the arts, and overall improvements in infrastructure, jurisprudence, religious reforms. It marks the end of what we now call the early Middle Ages and what was once called the Dark Ages. While the Renaissance period is obviously like the tail end of the Middle Ages to the transition to a, new era, there were several Renaissances in the medieval period, in the Middle Ages, and the Carolingian Renaissance is one of the first. So, he did a lot of imperial-type things, worked on infrastructure reform, sorting out legal codes and stuff. And like I said, he was a big fan of learning, especially in his later life. Speaking of his entire life, Charlemagne also had a pretty robust love life. Not quite as stingy as some other guys we know. He had some kind of arrangement with a woman named Himiltrud, who was the mother of his first son, but it's not exactly stated if they're ever formally married. His first confirmed wife, who also may have been concerned when I read this later, was Desiderata, daughter of Desiderius, who was the king of the Lombards. But Charlemagne got that one annulled when he went to war with Lombardy, so yeah, that didn't work out so good. His next wife was Hildegard, the queen, who's also pretty important. They had a lot of kids. After she died, he ended up marrying 2 more times, subsequently to Fastrada and to Luitgard. He also had several mistresses and concubines on the side. Even after Luitgard died, he was in relationships with women. And apparently Charlie was a bit of a family man. Almost all of his children were raised at court with him. He insisted on a classical education for both his sons and daughters, including teaching both of them to read and write. His daughters almost never seem to have married. I think there's like 1 confirmed marriage in there, but some of them did have a few children. This means with a lot of them running around, a lot of people can claim ancestry by way of Charlemagne today. Not quite as crazy widespread as Genghis Khan, but still, lots of descendants out there. Quite a few of your U.S. presidents, and many others. But of course, that's not all. The real-life history, fairly impressive. I am, compressing down a lot of military campaigning time to expand the borders of his empire in order to make this video come out in a timely fashion. But we also have a lot of mythologizing about Charlemagne. He's almost treated as a kind of mythical leader, a founder of chivalry, a noble, and a just leader. While his campaigns against the Saxons were pretty brutal, he was known to employ warfare as almost always a last resort and usually engaged in diplomacy first. Conflicts against the Lombards and some other groups were only done after they would not take any diplomatic settling. He was supposed to be pious and often donated to the church, and several of his daughters ended up running abbeys. But he wasn't so religious that he couldn't have cordial relations with his Muslim neighbors. Famously, the Abbasid Caliph was a diplomatic partner of Charlemagne and sent Charlemagne an elephant as a gift. And according to some historical sources, Charlemagne thought the elephant was pretty rad. He wanted them embroidered on his burial shroud. Now, a key part of this mythology is the idea that he did not wish to be crowned the Emperor Romanorum. While it does kind of seem like from contemporary and most immediate writers, Charlie never took the whole being Emperor of the Romans thing super seriously. It is unlikely that Pope Leo popped the crown on his head like a surprise party, but the humility is part of the branding, There are some people who go so far as to say that, the Pope did this completely without clearing it with Charlemagne. He had no idea. And then there are others who have done research into sources saying that, they were probably planning this, but like I said, he doesn't seem to have taken it very seriously that he, has to be the Emperor of the Romans. He's just saying, well, that's pretty cool. Anyway, I got stuff to do, bye. Also, hey, alt history writers got a fun one for you. So, Charlie was almost assuredly crowned the emperor because the Byzantines at the time were ruled by an Empress Irene, who bothered the Pope because A, she had a vagina, and B, she blinded her son in order to depose him. There are rumors, which may have never been more than a weird story at the time, like a kind of, wouldn't it be neat sort of thing that humans are prone to, that a marriage was attempted to be negotiated between Charlemagne and Irene. Though before this went anywhere, assuming there was anywhere for it to go, like I said, this could have just been a funny, story people were thinking about at the time, and somebody decided to scribble down somewhere. But she was deposed before it could go through. But if this marriage would have occurred, you'd basically have reformed the Roman Empire in the 800s, at least on paper, reuniting the East and the West. So there's your funny alternate history to set up, or your next Crusader Kings campaign. Also, some sources try to say that Charlemagne was a giant among men. He probably was around 6 feet tall, which was big for the day, but he wasn't super huge. But yeah, he was tall. He was normal tall, not NBA tall. Most of our mythologizing comes later in the 11th and 12th centuries, the High Middle Ages, when we're right at our peak, where Charlemagne's real history was mythologized to make up the matter of France. This is one of the 3 pillars of classical medieval storytelling. I've mentioned them a lot before in previous Wanteds, but to remind you that it is comprised of the matter of Rome, which is mostly the trilogy of the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, though there are also scattered other classical Greco-Roman works in there, and the matter of Britain, which is the whole Arthurian cycle, which by that point, had fully been pre-established in England and then flowed through into France and other areas. These also have their own elements of mythologizing real history. The war with the Trojans probably did actually happen in the Iliad, just, maybe not without all the god stuff. I'm reasonably certain the King of Ithaca was hopefully not lost at sea for 20 years. It's like, I don't know the actual mileage, but it's just that one corner of the Aegean and the Aegean. It's not that far, man. But our earliest and best source for this is the Song of Roland, or La Chanson de Roland, which is a mythological look at the Battle of Roncesvalles that I asked earlier. I probably shouldn't say pass as pas in this case. I don't actually know what the French word for mountain pass is. This is a type of medieval epic poem known as a chanson de guerre, a song of heroic deeds, literally. And it was written somewhere between 1040 and 1115 CE. The years are kind of open-ended because it was probably a work that was, in development for a long time. Our earliest, core plot is probably 1040, and then the finalized version started showing up around 1115. I'm not going to regurgitate the entire plot. I've mentioned it in some previous Wanteds. Charlemagne's not exactly a central character, so you can research it in your own time. There are some lovely translations available, but there are a couple of key parts we need to hit up. Basically, Charlemagne's been fighting the Muslims in Spain for about 7 years. He's subject to a dastardly plan to get him to withdraw, and so, him withdrawing, the Spaniards attack his rearguard. They are led by Roland and the paladins of Charlemagne, who are killed, but are cool enough to hold out long enough for Charlemagne to wheel around and kick some ass before he has to retreat for good. It establishes a few common tropes you see in these sorts of narratives. So, conflict between Charlemagne and the Saracens, who take on aspects of basically every culture the medieval writers didn't like. They're often referred to as Muslims, but are also sometimes referred to as Spaniards, and sometimes also are much more pagan than actual Muslims would have been. It's wild. Charlemagne is basically the big good of the setting. He's a cool and just king. He's pals with the Archangel Gabriel, but he mostly tends to sit in the background for more colorful characters. Some of this may just be that, because he's the historical domain character, people would know more about him, and the paladins are less historically established. Speaking of which, this also mentions his 12 peers or paladins, his most baller of knights, in the vein of the Round Table. The term paladin comes from the Latin palatine, a title which has several meanings in history, mostly as officials of an imperial palace. These would have included imperial guards and chamberlains during the Roman times, later court officials during the Carolingian dynasty, and they also had the term the palatine counts, who were higher-ranked officers of the court. No word on them being magical knights. This is also where we get the first name drop of several of our key characters. You see a lot in these cycles. Roland, nephew of Charlemagne, his pal Oliver, or Olivier, the Archbishop Turpin, the traitorous Ganelon, Ogier the Dane, and so forth. And other cool swords. Speaking of which, this is where Charlemagne's first attributed to the sword Joyeusse, a beautiful blade covered in gold and jewels with a piece of the Spear of Destiny in its hilt, which is color changes 30 times a day. What does that mean? Why does it do that? Don't know, but it sounds cool. There is actually a sword with that name in the Louvre, which was used in French coronations since the 13th century. Testing on the blade reveals that it may have actually been from an early 8th century sword. It's probably not the literal sword of Charlemagne, but it may be a gussied up period sword that people were like, oh, this could have been choice. We don't actually have any historical records, by the way, that at the time Charlemagne called his sword that. Note that Roland, or Hrodland, Hraudland, there's a lot of more vowels than you think there are in there, was real, probably. He was the governor of the Breton Marches, which would have been the Boer territory with Breton, in case you couldn't tell that one out. And no, Breton is not just from Elder Scrolls. And he was noted amongst the dead at Roncesvalles, but this was actually a fight against the local Basque population, who were annoyed at Charlemagne at the time. No story from the time if he actually punched a mountain in twain or had an unbreakable sword he jammed into the walls at Rocamadour Church, but he was a guy. The Paladins and Charlemagne continue to be popular subjects of medieval poems, and then even to the Renaissance era with the works of Orlando Innamorato and Orlando Furioso. If you want more details on those, check out previous Wanted episodes on Saber Astolfo and Bradamante. Those guys, as Paladins, are much more deeper into the narrative of that story. Roland is a 4-star, so I don't have to bother relating all 3 of those narratives to you in one big dump. But yes, in case you couldn't tell, Charlemagne, kind of a big deal. Lots of popular references are made to him. He's obviously part of the governmental founding of several European nations. There's a reason why the European Union is based in the Charlemagne building. There's also a band named Charlemagne. I'm not using their music for any of this, though I'm sure it's really cool because I wouldn't want to trigger the record gremlins, summon the goblins of the record label. But you can also check that one out. Like I said, very popular, pretty cool guy. So, to discuss Fate lore, we need to spoil a few things about Extella Link. But since that game came out in 2019, I told you it'd been a while, in international territories, we're just going to go for it. And if you haven't played it for some reason, R.I.P. Bozo. But in the game, it's explained that the Saber Charlemagne we meet is based off the Legends of Charlemagne, as noted in his own silver profile, though his hidden attribute is Star. It's not Earth, so it's not quite that clear out there. But he seems to have taken the mythological aspects of fiction, though his paladins don't really have any trouble recognizing him, possibly because they themselves are also of similarly shaky historical authenticity, but, you know, Astolfo's still like, yep, that's my king. I know that guy. The ruler, Karl the Great, Karl der Gross, appears as an antagonist in Extella Link, is based much more on the idea of Charlemagne as the Roman emperor and ruler of Western Europe. Normally, the ruler and saber forms can't coexist, and since Carolus Magnus there is a much more solid figure in the human order, normally only his Saint Graph should appear, but like several other servants, the description used in Extella Link usually involves Li Shuen. He has 2 golden eras. Charlemagne, or Charlie as he prefers, is him at his peak as a swordsman and military officer. Karl is him at his peak as an emperor and administrator. So, you know, people with long lives have multiple golden eras. Another good example of a very modern servant that you can see this in, though he has the ability to just instantly switch between the 2 versions, is Ptolemaeus, who was recently put out in JP. He also is a servant with literally 2 golden ages, but they packaged them all into one unit, basically. Now, in Extella Link, Charlemagne normally disappears eventually when you defeat Karl at the climax of the route. Since he's not actually a separate entity, he is just a same Saint Graph and Spirit Core, just different other stuff. Fate never feels the need to be very consistent about this. But in one of the routes, you know, your final route here, Small Altera will suggest having the Moonstar record him separately so he can exist as his own Saint Graph. This is presumably where the version of FGO comes from. He is made of battle data recorded in a certain place, aka, for some reason, we feel averse to just name-checking another one of our franchises, but also, hey, you should go check out Fate Extella Link on sale now. In his 3rd Ascension in FGO, he starts to show elements of Karl the Great in his appearance coming to 4, and also it changes up some of his, you know, lines and animations, and this 3rd Ascension does have to be unlocked via a quest like Dolman and Oberon, so that's another little fun aspect in there. Now, interesting enough, in Extella Link, it said that Karl supposedly found a relic of the Velber, you know, a big star mural and some other information going on. This talks about the Velber anti-cells, including Safar. It gives him a vision of the power of the Velber, and as a result, he basically decided to try and unify the world, hence his imperial ambitions. This probably changed his attribute to Star and seems to have altered his personality. It is effectively the part of the timeline where Charlemagne and Karl split off and go 2 separate routes in terms of, like, being recorded on the world. Also, it should be noted that despite the fact that Karl the Great looks very different, he's huge and also blonde, whereas Charlemagne has kind of two-tone white and black hair. In the flashback to this moment in Link, which is from Astolfo's POV, Karl looks exactly like young Karl looks exactly like Charlemagne. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe he went full blonde because he touched the star relic. So obviously Charlemagne's going to be a major character in Extella Link, and he'll be showing up in some capacity in Lost Belt 6.5 Traum since his banner is dropping them. We're not getting any spoilers to where he shows up and what he's doing, but he's going to be there because he's in the banner. And also, Charlemagne was the headliner for the most recent White Day in Japan. It's a couple years out now, which netted him a costume and a skill upgrade we're going to talk about later. So presumably he will appear in that event as well. And there's not really a lot else going on lore-wise. You know, he's kind of been stuck in the Extella, what do I want to call it? Not quite purgatory, but, you know, the Extella space. Presumably, there should be an Extella 2 at some point. That was at least planned, but obviously, Type Moon has been working on a lot of projects closer to the vest. Actually launching, you know, the Mahoyo remaster, the Tsukihime remake, and, you know, also major writing for FGO, working on Samurai Remnant, which was a big deal that kind of came out of nowhere. We are still working on Extra Record, so, you know, it seems like Type Moon's writing partners are all jammed up with other games, so at the time there's no plans for the second Extella game to actually come up and follow up on that. So we don't have a lot of additional lore, at least that you won't get in regular main story. So this means it's time to talk about mechanics. Alrighty, Charlemagne is a new SSR Saber, 5-star. So he's in the middle to low attack range and the higher HP range. You know, not everybody can be Sigurd or Arthur all the time. He's a quick arts buster with average hit counts in an NB game. Pretty normal stuff there. Yeah, I'm calling 4-hit quick average now. It's pretty normal. 3 to 4, I think, is the normally. His NP is also pretty normal. It's an AoE quick. It reduces the enemy's, plural, quick resistance for 3 turns based on overcharge, and it does bonus damage based on the more heroic king stacks he has, maximum of 12 stacks of that. It is, however, 12 hits, which I believe is the highest number of hits for an AoE quick NP. So that's pretty good. Now, his first skill is a little tricky. It's also a little quirky. In its original form, you target an ally, they gain 2 hits, 3 turns of an invul. If the invul doesn't go on Charlemagne, he gets his NP gain increased by 10 to 20% for 5 turns. And it also gives him a when attacked buff for 5 turns, which gives him a stack of Heroic King for 5 turns. However, if you target himself with the invul, his NP is sealed for 1 turn. The buffed version of this gives him some stuff to do regardless of who's getting targeted. It gives him 5 turns of applying the Heroic King stack when he lands a critical hit, a critical attack, and also generates 5 to 15 stars, making it more reliable to apply the stacks. This should hopefully mean that his NP trait damage comes up a little bit more. You are going to be waiting a while for that buff, so keep that in mind. But his second skill is a 10 to 20% attack up as a charisma, but also the rest of the buffs are on him. He gets a 20 to 30% damage up versus demonic enemies, a 20 to 30% defense up versus divine enemies, that is, enemies with the divinity trait, and also is a 20 to 30% battery. Nice little package there. Final skill is Mana Burst Light, pretty typical stuff. 20 to 30% quick up on self, and crit up on self for 3. Also gives him 30 to 50% crit damage versus evil enemies for 3 as well. Passives are just Magic Resistance A and Writing A, so they're very simple, but very solid modifiers. His quick cards are going to hit pretty good with that Writing A, and MRA for just passive debuff res is pretty good. So Charlie's a little weird. He's probably designed way before Traum. Like I said, Extella Link came out in Japan in 2018, so it was still like 4 years? Yeah, I think it would be 4 years from 2018 to 2022 when he debuted in JP. So yeah, no, it's a thing. It's a whole thing. So he probably was pre-designed before they managed to find a story to slot him in. But he should still be a solid unit. We are getting a revamp of quick cards this anniversary, and his NP seems designed with the double Scotty system in mind already. So he should have plenty of potential for farming. I mean, it's a 12-hit NP. It's really good. Getting his trait stacks will depend a lot on your ability to manipulate hits, but eventually you should get a way to do this with his buff. And his defensive options are still pretty solid. His NP gain up is real good if you just give the invul to somebody else. 20% NP gain up for 5 turns on top of, you know, his normal NP gain already being like 0.48. It should be very solid. The bonus damage should also make certain boss showdowns of Demonic and Evil pretty good, and Quick can absolutely produce crits. In fact, that is one of the buffs that is coming to Quick later this year, if you didn't know. If you lead with a Quick card, you're going to get a chance to just automatically crit regardless of stars used. So there's, a potential there for sure. And definitely the trait damage, the extra versus Demonic, will also be useful for farming. In a party comp, Charlemagne's pretty obviously your sweeper. He's got an AoE MP, it seems designed to loop. You can use him to blast away mobs, and in a long fight, the resistance down stacking for 3 turns can matter if you're looping break bars. He has solid trait damages for bosses and some decent defenses, 30% defense up versus Divine's not bad. If you need to, you can stick him with the invul to turtle some stuff out. It's pretty good. You can also use him to support a single target DPS. I would say, interestingly enough, Saber Astolfo or Skahak are probably your best focus buddies. Skahak because her single target damage is crazy, and she also has a demonic trait damage as well. And you can also use her as an off supporter as well with her targetable quick up, so you can kind of pick and choose when to pop your skills there. And Saber Astolfo just as another quick Saber who's single target there. Oddly enough, the only ST quick SSR Berserker I can think of, unless the wiki's really slacking, is MHXA, who probably isn't a good synergy fit with Charlemagne. So, and I don't think we have enough pretenders to start picking and choosing if they can do single target or AoE quick yet. So keep all that stuff in mind. I mean, and for supporters, it's Scotty. He has a 12-hit quick AoE. So this is dual Scotty synergy. Do 2 Scotties, you don't even need his battery, though you have his battery to extend out if the loops aren't working quite well. Just give yourself all the quick buffs, hope for crits on follow-up turns if you're fighting bosses or something. It's good. It's crazy good. You can also mix in Waver, for generic support, or even include a Castoria since he does have a couple of arts cards to work with. He is QQAA, so I think there's some potential, and, you can get even more trait damage out of Castoria. You can also try Zhang Jie as your budget support for Quick. He's a caster who's got some, team-wide Quick and arts up stuff and some terrain manipulation who can go in your squad. In general, pair Charlemagne with your Quick or art supporters, and if you can get somebody with a targetable taunt, you can probably use that to get some extra bonus stacks in there, put the damage on him to make sure. So keep that kind of stuff in mind. If you want to go down from SSR to SR, Adelante Alter has, a team-wide quick buff and is single-target quick damage, so you can probably get some kind of boss alternation there. In terms of CEs, Charlie has a 30% battery. You can try K-Scope stuff, or the related, imaginary element and stuff like that. To go into NP territory immediately, you can use his Append skill and rock a 50% charge of your favorite variety to also do that as well. I would recommend quick and NP damage up, but critical focus bonuses are also very helpful, especially after the buff for his first skill where you get the stacks when you crit. If you're going full dual Scotty, though, you can use Black Grail or whatever your current equivalent is, Heaven's Feel. I haven't memorized the name of the new versions of those CEs, but they exist. The ones that are 5-star, just NP damage up. So you can just go pure NP output for better farming. So in terms of the other stuff, Ascension is pretty normal. For the first few, you need Night Metals, which you may or may not have a load of. Those were very in demand for lots of servants for a long time. Feathers, Proofs, but the final one does take 36 Twilight Swords, which are a brand new mat, so you're going to want to watch out for that. It's a little rough to start out that way. You should get a decent amount of them through clearing the story that he comes with, but if you are like some people, not to name names, and you wanted to go through with a brand new servant in the new story, you might have to do a little bit of work, or spend some pure prisms. The skills mirror these mats, plus also includes silver circlets, and again, 72 Twilight Swords per skill. Bronze mats, man, damn. It's rough for a guy that's in a mat that's brand new, but that's how it be, Now, Charlemagne's actually pretty popular in banners. He's on the Trom release, obviously. He'll be back later this year for Chaldea Fairy Cup, which is Britomart, and lots of other servants. And obviously, like I said, this year, he was a cover servant for the White Day in Japan, so that's 2 years from now for our banners. And as a limited SSR, he's going to be on every Lucky Bag summon, so you are going to keep that in mind. Also, I believe I mentioned it earlier, but in case I did not, or you may have missed it, that White Day event, he gets a costume as well, in addition to the rank up. So, they haven't forgot about him. You got a couple of chances to swing the banner. Keep that in mind. And I don't think I have anything else right now. I think that's the end of it. Nothing else to note there. So now I'm going to blow the horn of the Oliphant. The horn of the Oliphant sounds a lot like the outro, which, I mentioned that, hey, you should like this video. If you hear me say the words like the video, you like this video, click it. Unless you watched it all the way to the end, in which case, click the dislike. You know, nobody's stopping you from doing that one. You can leave your comments in the comment section down below. You can also hit up our Discord, link in the video description, and on our channel page, our channel banner page. Yeah. You can also subscribe to always get new videos like Wanted's and like our regular podcast, Let's Talk FGO. Every week we talk about FGO. You want to know more about Traum and what's going to be in it before that maintenance finishes? Check out our latest video. Make sure you ring the bell for notifications so you always know when we're posting new videos and streams. We stream quite a bit. Check those out. And you can also support our channel memberships. Join our channel to get access to membership badges and emotes. And you can also support us on Patreon to get access to this video early. That's it. Roll the outro. And speaking of our patrons, let's give a shout out to our very shiniest of them, our favorite peers, like Adam Harp, Blacklist OG, Call Me Zed, Carlos, Dragon, Flightless Icebird, Jeremy Vasquez, JDV 9000, Jester the Fae, Starlight, Legendary Boss Hunter, Liam Kessler, Regent Raptor, Rise of Kenji, Ro Robin, Sharvor, Sean Pryor, some guy named Bob, and Varian the Crow. If you like what we do and want to see us do more, consider supporting us on Patreon. Thanks for your support.